In 1977, the United States government published a dietary guideline: reduce sodium intake. Salt was killing Americans. Heart disease was rising, blood pressure was climbing, and salt was the named culprit. That guideline was not built on settled science. It was built on contested and incomplete research, a body of studies that were disputed at the time they were published, and a food industry that needed a villain that was not their product. The low-sodium campaign launched from that moment and never stopped. It spread from America into every Western health system, every hospital dietary guideline, every nutrition label on every processed food product you have ever picked up. And while it spread, the food industry quietly continued loading every processed product on your shelf with industrial sodium in quantities that dwarfed anything a medieval peasant ever consumed from natural salt. They did not remove sodium from your diet. They removed your trust in natural salt, then replaced it with their version, at their price, in their product. That is not a health campaign. That is a market capture strategy, and it worked on an entire civilization for nearly 50 years. Subscribe to this channel right now before we go further. What you are about to watch has a paper trail, named decisions, documented commercial interests, and when someone tells you this is exaggeration, you will be able to tell them exactly which decade the decision was made and what your health has been paying for every month since. Medieval people did not fear salt. They depended on it, not as a flavoring, as a survival technology. Salt preserved meat through an entire winter. Salt preserved fish across months-long sea voyages. Salt preserved vegetables through fermentation, producing bioactive compounds that fed gut bacteria, supported immune function, and delivered minerals the modern processed food alternative does not contain. A medieval household without salt did not eat through winter. Salt was so strategically valuable that Roman soldiers received a specific allowance to purchase it, a payment historians have cited as the origin of the word salary, though the precise etymology remains debated. Medieval trade routes were built around salt. Wars were fought over it. Governments taxed it. Not because medieval people were primitive, because they understood through generations of documented practice that salt was not the enemy of the human body. It was one of its most essential operating requirements. That knowledge was buried in 1977 by a campaign built on contested science and sustained by interests that had no commercial stake in your health. Medieval people did not fear salt. They depended on it. Here is the specific science the low-sodium campaign needed you to never examine closely. The human body requires sodium, not tolerates it, requires it. Sodium regulates fluid balance. It transmits nerve signals. It contracts muscles. It maintains blood pressure within functional range. Without sufficient sodium, the body cannot perform basic physiological functions. The adrenal glands produce a hormone called aldosterone, specifically to retain sodium when intake drops too low. That hormonal response triggers a cascade. Cortisol rises. Insulin resistance can increase. The renin-angiotensin system activates, raising blood pressure through a mechanism entirely separate from sodium consumption itself. In other words, sodium restriction in some individuals can affect blood pressure through hormonal pathways the low-sodium campaign never accounted for. A 2011 analysis published in JAMA Internal Medicine examined data on sodium restriction and cardiovascular outcomes across multiple population studies. The findings were more complicated than 50 years of dietary guidelines had suggested. The analysis found associations between lower sodium excretion and increased cardiovascular mortality in certain populations. That finding generated significant scientific debate. It did not rewrite the dietary guidelines. It was noted, discussed in academic circles, and the guidelines continued largely unchanged. Because the guidelines were never purely about the science. Medieval salt was not industrial sodium chloride. It was unrefined. It contained magnesium, calcium, potassium, and trace minerals that worked alongside sodium within the body's own regulatory systems. A medieval peasant salting meat for winter preservation was not consuming isolated sodium chloride stripped of every companion mineral. They were consuming a mineral complex the human body had been regulating successfully for thousands of years before a single dietary guideline existed. The modern food industry uses refined industrial sodium chloride, stripped of every companion mineral, added to processed products in quantities calibrated not for your physiological needs, but for what food industry researcher Howard Moskowitz documented as the bliss point, the precise flavor threshold at which a processed food product produces maximum repeat consumption behavior. They did not remove sodium from your diet. They refined it, isolated it, stripped it of its mineral companions, added it to every processed product at the bliss point, and simultaneously told you that the unrefined natural salt your ancestors used as a survival technology for thousands of years was trying to kill you. That is the salt truth, and it was buried the moment it became commercially inconvenient. This is the moment in this video where this channel asks you to subscribe to this channel, because what you are watching is the pattern this channel exists to document, one buried truth at a time. A naturally occurring mineral demonized by a campaign built on incomplete science, while the industry that sustained that campaign continued using its refined industrial version in every product on your shelf. Subscribe to this channel now so you are present when the next one is uncovered. Here is who needed the salt narrative and what they gained from it. The processed food industry in 1977 was facing a credibility problem. Heart disease was rising, cancer rates were climbing, and the public was beginning to ask what in the modern diet was producing these outcomes. The answer the science was beginning to point toward was not natural salt. It was refined carbohydrates, industrial seed oils, ultra-processed food products containing synthetic additives, preservatives, and flavor compounds the human digestive system had no evolutionary history of processing. That answer was commercially catastrophic for an industry whose entire product line was built on those exact ingredients. A different answer was needed. Salt was the answer that served the processed food industry's interests most conveniently. Salt was ancient. Salt was natural. Salt was something every culture in human history had used. Focusing on salt shifted the conversation away from industrial processing and toward a mineral that had been part of the human diet for thousands of years before processed food existed. The low-sodium campaign did something else. It created an entirely new product category, low-sodium processed food. Same ultra-processed base product, same refined carbohydrates, same industrial seed oils, same synthetic additives with reduced sodium, and a health claim on the label. The industry that benefited from salt being the villain was also the industry that sold you the low-sodium alternative to the product it had already sold you. They created the fear. They created the solution. They charged you for both. Investigative reporting documented by journalist Michael Moss in Salt, Sugar, Fat revealed how processed food companies conducted internal research on sodium, understood its effects on consumer behavior at the bliss point, and calibrated their products accordingly while the public health conversation remained focused on natural salt consumption. The science was not the point. The market position was the point. Meanwhile, populations maintaining traditional unrefined salt consumption continued producing cardiovascular outcomes that the low-sodium Western populations were not consistently matching. That data existed, it was simply never given the platform that the low-sodium campaign had built over 50 years. Here is what that buried truth costs your body right now. Not in 1977, not in a laboratory, in your daily physiological function today. Research has documented associations between chronic low-sodium intake and elevated aldosterone, raised cortisol, and reduced insulin sensitivity in certain populations. These are not always dramatic symptoms. They can accumulate as background physiological patterns over years, expressing in some individuals as fatigue, difficulty regulating blood pressure, and metabolic changes that are difficult to connect to a dietary guideline followed in good faith for decades. Your medieval counterpart salted their food with unrefined mineral-rich salt, consumed fermented vegetables preserved in salt brine containing probiotic bacteria that fed their gut microbiome continuously, and never once consulted a dietary guideline about whether the mineral keeping them alive was trying to kill them. The specific chronic conditions produced by a diet systematically stripped of naturally occurring minerals and replaced with industrially refined substitutes were not the conditions filling their infirmaries. Those conditions are filling yours. Here is the honest question this video ends with. Look at your kitchen right now. How many products on your shelf carry a low-sodium label? How many of those products are ultra-processed? How many times have you reached for a low-sodium product believing you were making a healthy choice, while consuming the refined carbohydrates, the industrial seed oils, and the synthetic additives that the low-sodium label was designed to distract you from examining? Drop that honest answer in the comments right now. Not the answer that sounds informed, the real one, because the gap between what natural salt was and what the low-sodium campaign made you believe it was is the gap this channel exists to document. And your answer tells this channel exactly how personally that gap has landed. The salt story is not isolated. Demonize the natural ingredient, create the fear, sell the processed alternative with a health claim on the label. Then, when the processed alternative produces its own consequences, sell the supplement, the medication, the program to manage each symptom separately. That is not a health system. That is a revenue cycle, and it runs on your trust in the guidelines of the industry that designed it. Subscribe to this channel now and turn on your notification bell before you move on, because this channel is not finished. There are minerals in your kitchen, foods on your shelf, and systems in your daily diet that were once nutritionally complete, naturally occurring, and commercially inconvenient, and are now replaced with refined industrial substitutes carrying health claims designed to prevent you from asking what was removed. This channel documents them one at a time, with evidence, with the commercial paper trail, with the specific decisions those industries are counting on you never examining. The people who subscribe to this channel right now will be there for everyone. Do not leave without subscribing to this channel. This is the channel they are counting on you never finding. Medieval people salted their food, preserved their winter supply, and fed their gut microbiome with a mineral the modern food industry spent 50 years convincing you was your enemy. The industry that convinced you was the industry that replaced it. Now you know what was buried. The question is what you do with that knowledge.